Welcome to another deep dive. This time, we're taking a journey into the world of nuclear science.
Buckle up, because we're about to uncover some truly groundbreaking discoveries.
Oh, absolutely. And we'll also explore a few close calls that, honestly, still send chills down my spine.
Those moments, though, they really highlight how those events shaped our understanding of this powerful force.
Yeah, there are definitely turning points. And you know what? We're going to cover it all,
Mm.
from those first accidental
Oh,
discoveries.
you mean those whoops, what was that moments?
Exactly. To the race to build the atomic bomb, and even beyond. The whole shebang.
You know, it's mind-blowing when you think about it. Our journey into the atom, this whole field, it basically started with a simple accident.
Really. An accident. Tell me more.
Well, we're talking late 1800s here. Scientists were just starting to wrap their heads around the building blocks of matter.
Right, right. Atoms, elements, all that.
Exactly. And there was this physicist, Wilhelm Röntgen. He was messing around with cathode ray tubes one day when, bam, he stumbles upon something truly revolutionary. X-rays.
X-rays, like the things we use in hospitals today.
The very same. Can you imagine discovering these invisible rays that can pass through solid objects?
It's like seeing through walls. That must have been a total game changer.
Oh, it was a whole new dimension, you could say, and that was just the beginning.
Wow. So what happened next?
Soon after, this incredible scientist, Marie Curie, comes along. She dedicates her entire life to understanding this thing called radioactivity.
Marie Curie. Didn't she win like a million Nobel Prizes?
Two, actually. One for physics and one for chemistry. She's a total rock star in the science world.
Wow, impressive. Okay, so she's studying radioactivity. What does that even mean back then?
Well, she was basically trying to figure out what this mysterious energy was, where it came from, and in the process, she makes a huge discovery. Two new elements, polonium and radium.
So she's like an atomic detective, discovering hidden elements. I
Yeah,
like it.
she was a pioneer. But here's the thing, her dedication came at a cost. She worked with these radioactive materials with very little protection, you know?
Right, back then they didn't really understand how dangerous radiation could be.
Exactly. And sadly, that exposure eventually led to her death. It's a tragic reminder of the risks these early nuclear scientists faced.
A reminder that sometimes great discoveries come at a price. It makes you appreciate their bravery even more.
But speaking of risks, there's this story that always gets me. You know about Ibn Byers?
Oh, yeah. The radium tonic guy. What a cautionary tale.
This wealthy industrialist who drank almost 1,400 bottles of radium-laced tonic, he believed it was a miracle cure. Can you believe it?
It seems crazy now, but back then, the public was fascinated by radiation. They didn't grasp the dangers.
Radium water, radium toothpaste, radium everything, like it was some magical elixir.
There was very little understanding of its long-term effects. Poor Byers. His case became a tragic example of how wrong things could go.
It's a stark reminder of how scientific understanding evolves over time. What seems like a good idea in one era can turn out to be a disaster in another. It's a constant process of discovery, experimentation, and learning from our mistakes. And those mistakes sometimes have huge consequences, especially when we're dealing with something as powerful as the atom.
And those consequences became even more apparent with the Manhattan Project and the race to build the atomic bomb. Talk about high stakes.
Yeah, the Manhattan Project was a game changer, no doubt. It wasn't just about science. It was about engineering, logistics, politics, all wrapped into one massive, top-secret endeavor.
It's mind-blowing, the sheer scale of it all. Building entire cities dedicated to producing enriched uranium. Like Oak Ridge in Tennessee. Have you seen pictures of that place?
Oh, yeah. It's massive. A sprawling complex that seemingly popped up out of nowhere. The amount of resources and brain power that went into it, it's just astounding.
And the secrecy. I mean, can you imagine the pressure those scientists were under? The weight of the world on their shoulders. They knew what was at stake.
Absolutely. They were racing against time, knowing that the fate of the world could hang in the balance.
And then, of course, came Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Events that would forever change the course of history.
The atomic bombings ushered in the atomic age. It was a turning point for humanity, both in terms of technological advancement and the profound anxieties that came with it.
It's a complex legacy to grapple with. We witnessed the incredible power of the atom, but also its devastating destructive potential.
It forced the world to confront the reality that this power could be used for both good and evil. A double-edged sword, you could say.
And with great power comes great responsibility, right? Unfortunately, we learned that lesson the hard way, as we'll see when we delve into the accidents that followed.
Because, harnessing the power of the atom, It's not without risks. There were bound to be some bumps along the road, and sadly, some of those bumps had tragic consequences.
Like the stories of Harry Daghlian and Louis Slotin at Los Alamos. Those always get to me.
Two brilliant physicists working on the cutting edge of nuclear research, pushing the boundaries of what we knew about critical mass.
Critical mass, that sounds intense. What does it actually mean?
It's the minimum amount of fissile material, like plutonium, needed to sustain a nuclear chain reaction. Basically the point where things go boom.
Okay, so Daghlian and Slotin were trying to figure out that tipping point.
Yeah. They were conducting experiments trying to determine that exact threshold, but even the slightest misstep, a tiny miscalculation, could lead to disaster.
And sadly, that's exactly what happened. They both suffered fatal radiation exposure.
Their deaths were a wake-up call for the scientific community. It highlighted the need for extreme caution and meticulous safety protocols when working with these materials. Even a split-second decision could have devastating consequences.
It's a chilling reminder that we're dealing with forces that demand the utmost respect and vigilance. It's like walking a tightrope, one wrong move, and it's all over.
Exactly. And as we'll see, that lesson had to be learned again and again as we move on to accidents like the Windscale fire in England.
Windscale. That's another one that always makes me think, wow, how did that happen?
Well, it was a stark reminder that both human error and design flaws can contribute to a nuclear disaster.
It wasn't just one thing that went wrong, right? It was a combination of factors.
You got it. It turned out there were some design flaws in the reactor itself.
What kind of flaws?
Well, for one, they were using graphite to moderate the nuclear reaction, and graphite, as it turned out, can catch fire under certain conditions. And then there were some operational errors that compounded the problem.
Oh no. So you had this flammable material, and then people made mistakes while operating the reactor. That's a recipe for disaster.
And a disaster it was. The fire released radioactive material into the environment, and it took a massive effort to contain it.
It's scary to think how easily things can spiral out of control when dealing with such powerful forces. We have to remember that with nuclear energy, there's very little room for error.
Absolutely. Every step, every decision has to be made with the utmost care and precision. And even then, there's always a chance that something unexpected could happen.
Like with the SL-1 reactor explosion in Idaho. That was a tough one, mostly caused by human error, wasn't it?
That's right. A tragic accident that could have been prevented. It highlighted the importance of proper training and strict adherence to safety protocols.
And then there were the criticality incidents at the Hanford site in Washington. Those were in the 70s, right?
1976, to be exact. It was a series of incidents, actually, each one revealing flaws in design and procedure.
So again, it wasn't just one thing. It was a combination of factors that led to these accidents.
That's often the case. Multiple layers of safety failing, sometimes in unexpected ways. But, despite the tragedy at Hanford, it led to some positive developments, like significant improvements in chelation therapy.
Chelation therapy, to help with radiation exposure.
Exactly. It involves using special medications that bind to radioactive materials in the body.
So basically, they act like tiny magnets, grabbing onto the radioactive stuff and helping to flush it out.
Pretty much. It was a major step forward in treating people exposed to high levels of radiation. So even in the face of disaster, there was some progress made.
It's like they say, every cloud has a silver lining. But those early accidents, as serious as they were, pale in comparison to what happened at Chernobyl. That was a global wake-up call.
Chernobyl was a disaster of unimaginable proportions, a catastrophic explosion followed by a massive fire that released huge amounts of radioactive material into the atmosphere.
I still remember seeing those images on TV. The burning reactor, the abandoned city of Pripyat. It felt like something out of a nightmare.
It exposed fundamental flaws in the RBMK reactor design, which was common in the Soviet Union at the time.
So the reactor itself was inherently unsafe.
To a certain extent, yes. There were design features that made it more vulnerable to accidents, and then there was a culture that prioritized production over safety, which compounded the problem.
So it was a combination of technical flaws and human factors, a perfect storm in a way.
It was a tragedy that could have been avoided, and it forced the world to rethink nuclear safety standards and reactor designs.
Chernobyl had a profound impact on how we approach nuclear power.
It led to increased international cooperation on nuclear safety and a greater emphasis on transparency and accountability.
We realized that nuclear accidents didn't respect national borders. The consequences could be felt globally. But Chernobyl wasn't the only major nuclear accident that shook the world. Just a few years earlier, we had 3 Mile Island here in the United States.
3 Mile Island, although not as devastating as Chernobyl, had a profound impact on public perception of nuclear power, especially in the U.S. It shattered the illusion that such accidents couldn't happen in a technologically advanced nation.
People were terrified. The idea of an invisible threat, radiation leaking into the air and water, it really fueled public anxiety about nuclear power.
And rightfully so. It was a close call, a partial meltdown of the reactor core.
So what exactly went wrong at 3 Mile Island?
It was a combination of equipment malfunctions and, unfortunately, human error. A series of mistakes and misjudgments that escalated the situation.
So again, a combination of technical and human factors. It seems like a recurring theme in these accidents.
It often is. And it highlights the importance of designing reactors that are inherently safe, even in the face of human error.
Reactors that can tolerate mistakes,
Yeah.
that have built-in safeguards to prevent small problems from cascading into major disasters.
Exactly. We need reactors that are forgiving, so to speak. And as we learned from the Fukushima Daiichi disaster in Japan, we also need to design for the unexpected, for events that push the boundaries of our imagination.
Fukushima, wow. Another stark reminder of nature's power. An earthquake and tsunami that overwhelmed the plant's defenses.
And it led to multiple meltdowns and widespread releases of radiation.
It raised serious questions about the safety of nuclear power, especially in areas prone to natural disasters.
Fukushima forced us to rethink our assumptions about risk and resilience. It showed us that even the most technologically advanced nations aren't immune to the forces of nature, and that we need to be prepared for the unthinkable.
It's a sobering reminder that we have to be humble in the face of these powerful forces, both natural and man-made.
And that we have a responsibility to use our knowledge and technology wisely with respect for the potential consequences.
It's a heavy responsibility for sure. But as we've seen throughout this journey, from those early discoveries to the devastating accidents, the story of nuclear science is filled with both triumphs and tragedies.
And it's a story that continues to unfold. We're still learning, still grappling with the challenges, and still striving to harness the power of the atom responsibly and safely.
So as we move on to explore the future of nuclear power, we'll carry with us the lessons learned from the past, both the successes and the setbacks.
And we'll approach this next chapter with a sense of cautious optimism, recognizing the potential benefits of nuclear energy while remaining mindful of the risks involved.
Because the future of nuclear science is not just about technological advancements. It's about making wise choices, fostering international cooperation, and ensuring that this powerful force is used for the betterment of humanity.
You know, it's kind of interesting how even with all the risks and the anxieties around nuclear power, there are still those folks out there working hard to make it safer.
Yeah, it's like they see the potential benefits,
Yeah.
the clean energy aspect, and they're determined to figure it out.
Exactly. And one area where that's really happening is with these things called breeder reactors.
Breeder reactors. Okay, I vaguely remember hearing about those, but honestly, they always seemed kind of sci-fi to me.
I know, right? It sounds like something out of Star Trek, but it's a real thing and a really fascinating concept.
So what makes breeder reactors so different from the regular kind?
Well, the big difference is that breeder reactors actually produce more fuel than they consume.
Wait, hold up. They make more fuel than they use? How is that even possible?
It's wild, right? They do this by converting the stuff called uranium-238, which is not the kind of uranium you normally use for fuel.
Right, the usual kind is uranium-235, if I remember correctly.
You got it. So they take this uranium-238 and convert it into plutonium-239, which can then be used as fuel.
So it's like a self-sustaining energy source.
Pretty much. It's like an energy machine that keeps on giving.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
But I gotta admit, whenever I hear plutonium, my mind immediately jumps to nuclear weapons.
Yeah, I get it. It's a natural association. And it's one of the reasons why breeder reactors have always been a bit controversial.
Because that plutonium they create could theoretically be used for bombs, right?
Yes, theoretically. But here's the thing. The plutonium produced in conventional reactors can also be used for weapons.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
So the issue isn't so much about the technology itself, but about the safeguards and the international regulations we have in place to make sure that nuclear materials aren't diverted for, nefarious purposes.
So it comes down to trust and oversight and making sure that everyone's playing by the rules.
Exactly. If we can get that part right, if we can ensure that there's robust international cooperation and strict oversight, breeder reactors could be a real game changer.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
Imagine a world where we could significantly reduce our dependence on uranium mining.
Because mining uranium, it has its own environmental and social costs, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's a pretty messy process. So if breeder reactors could help us lessen our reliance on mining, that'd be a huge win.
That's a compelling argument.
Yeah.
But we can't ignore the other big issue when it comes to nuclear power. Nuclear waste.
You're right. The problem of nuclear waste, it's something we definitely have to address.
Because even with breeder reactors, you're still generating radioactive byproducts, right?
That's true. Breeder reactors don't magically solve that problem.
And that waste has to be stored safely for, like, thousands of years, right?
Yeah, it's one of the biggest challenges facing the entire nuclear industry, finding a long-term solution for nuclear waste disposal.
It makes you wonder, are there any new innovations out there that could address these concerns about safety and waste disposal?
Actually, there are. And some of the most promising solutions involve taking a fresh look at ideas from the past, like this thing called the molten salt reactor experiment.
The molten salt reactor experiment. Never heard of it.
It was way back in the 1960s at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. They were exploring a really radical departure from conventional reactor designs.
Okay, you've got my attention. What was so radical about it?
Well, they used this molten salt mixture as both the fuel and the coolant in the reactor.
Molten salt? That sounds like something out of a mad scientist's lab.
I know, right? But it had some really cool advantages.
Like what?
Well, for starters, it operated at much higher temperatures than traditional reactors, which meant greater efficiency.
So more energy output for the same amount of fuel.
Precisely. And because the fuel was already in a liquid state, it eliminated the risk of a traditional meltdown.
Wait, no chance of a meltdown. So, like, what happened at Chernobyl or Fukushima couldn't happen with this type of reactor?
Right. If the reactor overheated, the molten salt would expand, which would naturally slow down the nuclear reaction. It was like a self-regulating mechanism.
Wow, that's impressive. It sounds inherently safer.
It did have some drawbacks, though, like corrosion of materials in that high-temperature environment. It was a tough engineering challenge.
So what happened to the project? If it was so promising, why didn't it catch on?
Well, funding for research and development eventually dried up, and the project was discontinued.
The classic story of a potentially groundbreaking idea getting shelved due to lack of funding.
It happens more than you think. But the good news is there's been a resurgence of interest in molten salt reactor technology lately.
Really? So it's making a comeback.
Yep. There are a few companies and research institutions out there that are taking another look at it, trying to overcome those technical challenges and make it a viable option for the future.
It's kind of like a blast from the past, huh? Those old ideas sometimes have a way of coming back around when we need them most.
That's the beauty of science, always pushing the boundaries, exploring new frontiers, and sometimes revisiting old ideas with fresh perspectives.
So it seems like nuclear science is this constant cycle of innovation, setbacks, reassessment, and then pushing forward again, always learning from the past.
It's a journey of discovery, that's for sure. And as we look to the future, it's clear that nuclear science is going to continue to play a major role in shaping our world.
But along with the science and technology, there's this whole other layer we have to consider, right? The ethical implications.
You hit the nail on the head. We're talking about a powerful force, and with that power comes a huge responsibility.
Right, like what are the long-term consequences of our choices? How do we ensure that this technology is used for good and not for harm?
Those are the questions we need to be asking ourselves as a society, and there aren't always easy answers.
It's a complex issue for sure, but it's a conversation we need to have.
Absolutely. And it's not just a conversation for scientists and policymakers. It's a conversation for all of us.
Because ultimately these decisions about nuclear technology, they affect us all.
Exactly. And the more informed we are, the better equipped we'll be to make those decisions wisely.
So as we continue this deep dive into the world of nuclear science, let's keep those ethical considerations front and center.
Agreed. It's not just about the atoms and the energy, it's about the human choices and the responsibilities that come with wielding this incredible power.
It's kind of wild when you think about how nuclear science has been woven into the fabric of world history.
Oh, absolutely. It's had a huge impact, that's for sure.
From, like, the race to build the bomb during World War II.
The Manhattan Project, yeah. Talk about a pressure cooker.
To the Cold War and all that anxiety about nuclear proliferation, it's like this constant undercurrent of tension.
Right, like a shadow hanging over everything. You can't really talk about the 20th century without acknowledging the role that nuclear weapons played.
It really shaped the global landscape. And it made us confront some pretty unsettling questions about, like, the destructive capacity of humanity.
Yeah. It forced us to grapple with the fact that we had created a weapon capable of wiping out entire civilizations.
And that realization had a profound impact on international relations.
Oh, definitely. It led to the formation of new international organizations and treaties, all aimed at preventing another nuclear war.
Like the Non-Proliferation Treaty, right?
Exactly. It was a huge step towards trying to control the spread of nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
But even with all those efforts, the threat of nuclear terrorism and the challenges of nonproliferation, those are still issues we're dealing with today.
It's a reminder that the impact of nuclear science goes way beyond, just the science itself. It has huge geopolitical implications.
It affects everything. Politics, economics, global security, it's all interconnected. And it forces us to think about these big ethical questions.
Right, like what are the limits of our knowledge? How much power should we allow ourselves to have?
And how do we use that power responsibly? Those are questions that don't have easy answers.
We've talked a lot about those negative consequences of nuclear technology, like with the accidents at Windscale, 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, and Fukushima, each one a tragic reminder of the potential dangers.
Yeah, those were definitely dark moments in the history of nuclear science. Important reminders of what can go wrong when we're not careful.
But it's also important to remember the good that's come out of nuclear science, right? I mean, they're peaceful applications that have benefited humanity in all sorts of ways.
Oh, absolutely. It's not all doom and gloom. In fact, nuclear science has played a huge role in advancing things like healthcare and agriculture.
Can you give me some examples?
Sure, think about medical imaging. X-rays, CT scans, PT scans, those all rely on nuclear technology.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Those are pretty essential tools for diagnosing and treating diseases.
And then there's radiation therapy, which is used to treat cancer. It's saved countless lives.
Okay, so nuclear medicine is a huge area where it's been beneficial. What about agriculture?
Well, we use nuclear techniques to develop new varieties of crops that are more resistant to disease and pests. And we can use radiation to sterilize food, which helps prevent spoilage and extends shelf life.
Wow, I didn't realize nuclear science had so many diverse applications.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing when you think about it. From saving lives in hospitals to helping us feed a growing population, nuclear science is quietly working behind the scenes in all sorts of fields.
It's like a hidden hero, in a way.
Kind of, yeah. It's often overshadowed by the negative associations, but the reality is that it's made a huge positive impact on our lives.
But even with all those positive applications, there's still the big elephant in the room,
Yeah.
nuclear waste.
Yeah, that's the one issue that keeps coming back to haunt us.
We're still trying to figure out how to safely and sustainably manage these materials that remain dangerous for, like, crazy long periods.
It's a tough one. There are no easy solutions.
We talked earlier about reprocessing spent fuel as a way to reduce the volume of waste.
Reprocessing is definitely an option, and it has the potential to make the waste less toxic in the long run.
So we could extract reusable materials from the spent fuel and basically recycle them.
Exactly. But there are also concerns about the safety and security of reprocessing plants, and the potential for those materials to be diverted for illicit purposes.
Right, like what if they fall into the wrong hands? That's a scary thought.
So it's a trade-off. We have to weigh the benefits of waste reduction against the risks associated with reprocessing.
It's a tough decision for sure. And it highlights just how complex this whole issue is.
It's a tangle of technical challenges, political considerations, and ethical dilemmas.
And ultimately, finding a solution is going to require a lot of open and honest dialogue, not just among scientists and experts, but among the public as well.
Absolutely. We need a global conversation about how we're going to manage nuclear waste in a way that's both safe and responsible.
Because this is a legacy we're leaving for future generations.
Exactly. We need to find a solution that protects not just ourselves, but also the planet and the people who come after us.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the world of nuclear science, I'm left with this sense of awe at the power of the atom, but also a healthy dose of caution.
I think that's a good way to put it. Awe and caution. Because it's a powerful force, and we have a responsibility to use it wisely.
We've seen how it can be used for both good and evil. We've seen the incredible advancements it's made possible.
And we've also seen the devastating consequences when things go wrong.
It's a complex and challenging subject, but it's also incredibly fascinating. And it's one that affects us all, whether we realize it or not.
So keep asking questions, stay curious, and never stop learning. Because understanding nuclear science, it's not just about understanding the science, it's about understanding ourselves and our place in the world.
Well said. It's been a pleasure exploring this fascinating topic with you. And to our listeners, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of nuclear science.